Welcome back in. It's the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. Going to be joined in just a moment by Tyler Calvaruso. And there's a lot cooking right now in Happy Valley when it comes to the current football team. Winter workouts are officially underway this Monday. We're coming to you a day earlier because of some recruiting news here on the first full week of February. But winter workouts underway. We'll have coverage of those over at Lions247.com. We've got a thread going on at Lions247.com right now about the top performers, the top competitors from this first session early on Monday morning. These are very challenging workout sessions very early in the morning, especially for these players making their transition to the college level or perhaps transferring into the program. Gut check time for this team in a lot of ways, but an important step forward, getting eventually towards spring break in early March. And then they come back from spring break. They're into spring practices, and we'll all get a chance to see them at the Blue-White game in mid-April. But this show specifically, we're going to focus in on recruiting because Penn State's fresh off of a very important in-state pickup, a priority prospect that we've discussed in the past. And there's a lot of feedback as well coming out of the third consecutive weekend with the junior day on campus. We've got the college football dead period hitting us now. So going to get a little bit more quiet on the recruiting trail, but things heated up again for Penn State this past weekend. To break it down, of course, we turn to Tyler Calvaruso, who has the latest on this pickup for Penn State's 2025 class. And we'll got a few other names that we're going to be monitoring who could eventually and maybe potentially sooner rather than later add to the 2025 recruiting class. But first things first, Tyler, great job with coverage. I know there's a lot of teamwork that goes into it. Brian Doan, Steve Wiltfong, you've got Tom Loy doing a lot for us as well. But you're obviously spearheading it on a day-to-day basis at Lions 24/7 with our Penn State recruiting coverage. So good work, third consecutive junior day in the books, and this one produces a commitment in Alex Tatsch, in-state linebacker out of Greater Latrobe High School. He's a name that you and I discussed in depth a couple times going in through the month of January as it maybe the next guy to join the class. You had a crystal ball pick in, and here it is.
Yeah, it's a big commitment too. Tash was one of Penn State's top priorities in the 2025 class for a multitude of reasons. You know, he plays a position of need at linebacker. Penn State's always looking to stockpile talent in the linebacker room. And when you throw on Tash's tape, I mean, you know, he's one of those high school prospects who there are very few who kind of have like that wow factor on tape. I think Tash is one of them personally. I mean, if you put it on and watch, it's pretty easy to figure out every game he plays who the best player on the field is. It's him. I mean, he's one of the better players in the WPIAL, and Penn State just continues to roll in Western Pennsylvania with Terry Smith spearheading the effort there. That's 4 commits from the WPIAL in this 2025 recruiting class early on. Tash, you know, he's arguably the best of the bunch. Hard hitter, sound tackler, his technique is where it needs to be. Good athlete, multi-sport athlete. You know, he's run track, he's played basketball, so the athletic profile is there. His stock is nothing but on the rise. He received his initial rating from 24/7 Sports yesterday. I checked in as a high 3-star recruit with an 89 rating. Compositor, he has him as a 4-star. And really moving forward, Tash is going to be a top 24/7 candidate. You know, I've heard that from multiple people. His stock is definitely on the rise, and he's going to wind up, at least at this rate, the way he's trending, as one of the higher-ranked players in Penn State's 2025 recruiting class. He wanted to get back to campus to get this one done in person. You know, he visited for that January 20th junior day, the first junior day of the offseason. Everything went really, really well there. Kind of solidified Penn State as his clear top option, and kind of reinforced that timeline we were thinking of sooner rather than later. That winds up coming to fruition, but he returned to campus on Saturday mainly because he wanted to let the staff know in person that, hey, he wants to be part of this 2025 recruiting class. So big get for Penn State no matter how you slice it. Alex Tatsch, one of the top targets on Penn State's board, now in the bag for the Nittany Lions.
From that Pittsburgh metropolitan area out west, and it's an area that's been pretty good to Penn State of late. Of course, one of their top early enrollees from that region in Quentin Martin in the running back room, and now Alex Tatsch, the latest addition, I should say, to this class. And as you said, a guy who seems to be in some ways like Owen Alicine a couple of weeks ago, who they picked up. Right now, he's in that high 3-star territory, but there's a lot about the trajectory of each of those prospects that lead you to believe they may be trending upward when it's all said and done. And by the way, we have to pitch this before it gets too late. We got a 75% off deal. And if folks have been following our VIP coverage, and Tyler specifically the last couple of weeks, this move comes as no surprise that Tash comes on board with the Nittany Lions, and a lot of good intel coming out of this latest recruiting weekend, including another crystal ball, which we'll get into momentarily. But our VIP subscribers are knowing about this well in advance of when our podcast listeners are. I know that we have a lot that kind of cross over between those two, but Tyler, 75% off deal. And the reason I want to mention at the top of the show, it only lasts today. It's just happening on this Monday, February 5th. So come midnight tonight, it's done. Tuesday, it's over with. So it's happening right now. And Tyler, if people out there are just looking for the encouragement to make this move, which we can sell all the stuff we do during the season, during prospect camps in the summer, during spring ball, when we're on the field and we're watching these practices and what our VIP subscribers get out of that. But when it's a random Monday in February, or, a middle of the summer day when there's not a camp going on, recruiting's always happening. What are you providing that our listeners are missing out on that value if they're only tuning in for these podcast episodes and nothing more?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a 365-day affair. It's a full calendar year, but probably more so now than ever with the transfer portal and just everything that goes into recruiting. You got to recruit on multiple levels now. That is the world we live in college football. So, if you're sitting around, you're listening to the pod thinking, oh, it's January, season's over, not a whole lot must be going on. I promise you that is not the case. You got these junior day visits. Once spring practice rolls around, guys are going to be back on campus. Just there's a lot that goes into it on a day-to-day basis, and we've always got you guys covered with content on a daily basis with what Penn State is doing on the recruiting trail, who the top guys are, how boards at certain positions are coming together. And of course, what are some of these kids thinking about Penn State? We're constantly checking in with prospects who are high in the Nittany Lions to get a better feel of where they're at in their process, not just from a Penn State perspective either, but overall as well. These guys have a lot of schools to sort through, and it's always interesting to dive into their lists, see what they think about specific schools. So we've always got, we try to cover all our bases. I think we do a pretty good job of it, but day in and day out, we've always got something new for you guys to share, no matter what time of year it is.
Yeah, we'll give you a reminder again later on the show before we say goodbye. But again, 75% off a full year of coverage at Lions 24/7 going on through 11:59 p.m. Eastern time here on Monday. So act now if you want to make that move. We reached an all-time site high in subscriptions. Our community continues to grow. That was late in 2023. Let's continue to build it in 2024. We would love for you to be a part of that. But let's move on. Let's get back to the addition here and Alex Tatsch. I think what I loved about the productivity during his junior season, where you look at him against the competition and he certainly stands out in the way you would hope a Penn State linebacker commit would look as a junior in high school. But the turnovers he was able to create. This wasn't just the guy going out there and doing the blowback hits, which I know Penn State loves to see. They don't just want to see defenders, whether it's the safety or cornerback, a linebacker, what have you. They don't want to see the wrap up and tackle. They want to see them inflicting some blowback kind of hits at the high school level and really leaving their mark over the course of 4 quarters. He's producing plays, though. 3 forced fumbles, 4 interceptions in a 12-game span. I just thought this guy, you see him and you think, okay, he's got the size, he's got the physicality. He's kind of just going to be, maybe he's going to be a guy who cleans up in the run game, able to get after it a bit. I think there is a playmaking ability to Tash's game where he can do a little bit more and maybe be a pendulum swinger in terms of defense. Not every linebacker is going to be that. I don't think you can point out to every single linebacker Penn State has brought in and say he's going to go out and make plays. You're thinking he's going to be a really solid guy in his role. I think Tatsch can do some things maybe off script a little bit at the linebacker position that can swing games as he develops in his career.
Yeah, what Tatsch brings to the table is kind of the marker of a truly great defense. Elite defenses turn opposing offenses over. It's all well and good. You're out there getting stops and getting off the field on 3rd down and, forcing your opponent into 3rd and long situations. But when you're turning your opponent over consistently, that's the marker of an elite defense. And Tatsch showed throughout his junior year that he has the ability to do that. 3 forced fumbles, 4 interceptions. I'd say that's probably the most notable aspect of it is the 4 interceptions. Yep. Him dropping into coverage, showing off his athleticism. Sometimes you see high school linebackers, they pick up a bunch of interceptions, then you go and look at the tape and it's kind of, off a deflection or, you're in the right place at the right time and the ball falls into your lap. Definitely not the case with Tatsch. He's making plays in coverage. He's definitely, what it comes back to for me is he's just the kind of kid that Penn State gets, specifically at linebacker. all of the traits that he has is what Penn State looks for in its linebackers. He profiles as a Mike at the next level. When you compare him to some of the 2024 signings that Mike and Kari Jackson and Anthony Specca, he's probably a little different. I think those guys are more traditional thumpers who are going to clean up in the run game, as you mentioned. Tatsch could do a little bit more for you, I think, as a prospect. Like we said, that athleticism, he has been flashing that throughout his high school career, whether it be on the football field, on the hardwood, playing basketball, on the track. I mean, he set a personal best on the track in April of 2022 as a freshman. So his athletic ability has been apparent for an extended period of time. And yeah, I just think his versatility and what he contributes as a Mike backer is again, it's just what Penn State's defense needs.
Yeah, he's got a nice history on the track field, as you mentioned, some long jump work in his past. But you just look at the production, and it wasn't just as a defender last year. Also got involved 6.6 yards per carry as a running back, 6 rushing touchdowns. We talked about the turnovers. So he created 85 tackles along the way, including 4 sacks as a junior at Latrobe. He's somebody I'm really curious to see in a 7-on-7 setting, because I would love to see how that coverage looks. When going up against bigger, maybe a bigger receiver who's playing a tight end role, or just a large frame receiver, 6'3+ kind of guy. And then also maybe working against more of a shiftier opponent or a running back out of the backfield, someone who's going to bring a little bit more juice laterally. How does Tatsch counter that? It's something I expect we'll get to see this upcoming summer on the fields at Penn State. Looking forward to that. And our evaluation of Tatsch and the conversations with him will continue between now and when he joins this program. So we'll continue to wrap our heads around him. And there's now 9 guys in this class, Tyler, in terms of what Penn State's working with for the 2025 cycle. It's the 2 additions that have come during this junior day span. Tatsch, of course, the latest. And before that, we mentioned Owen Alicine, the big 6'7" offensive tackle out of Avon Old Farms in Connecticut. And the question with recruiting, as always, is, well, who's next? Who's going to push this thing to double digits, keep the ball rolling forward? It's a group that, as of right now, on Monday, February 5th, ranked 6th nationally in 2025 rankings at 24/7 Sports. And that is the question I'll now pose to you, Tyler. Your latest crystal ball pick has come off the board. He's now a Nittany Lions commit in Tatsch. Where are we looking now? You can start wherever you'd like.
Yeah, the hot name is another Western PA guy, another WPIL standout, and that is Deshaun Burnett from Amani Christian. He didn't make it back to Penn State for any junior day visits throughout the winter, and he's kind of been a guy we haven't talked about a whole lot recently. But Terry Smith and James Franklin made it out to Amani Christian for a visit late last week, and at this point, Penn State profiles as the team to beat for Deshaun Burnett. He narrowed his list down to 5 in December. He's always held the Nittany Lions in high regard. He visited a couple times in 2023. He visited for the season opener against West Virginia, and he told me that he had a really good time at that visit. Really liked the way Penn State's defense was flying around out there against the Mountaineers. And he was part of that annual Lash Bash barbecue at the end of July, where you see a lot of priority guys make it to campus and catch up with the staff. So Burnett is the hot name right now. Beyond him, 2 DBs I'm keeping an eye on moving forward. And again, the term next these days is pretty relative. Next could be a month or so from now, just given the fact that so many guys are taking a more long-term approach to their recruitment, given the new structure of the recruiting calendar with the unlimited official visits and whatnot. But 2 DBs, specifically at safety, Kanoa Winston, Jadon Blair, 2 guys we've gotten the chance to talk about a lot. Penn State has positioned itself pretty well with both of them, especially Blair. I've toyed around with the idea of tossing a crystal ball pick for him. I'm going to hold off for a little bit. Penn State's in a pretty good spot. There are still things Blair wants to see. He wants to get to Michigan for a visit. I would assume that takes place during the spring. It's really going to come down to his parents' schedule and where he can get out and visit before locking in his official visits. Penn State will be one of them. I think Notre Dame is still a player for Blair. When Ethan Long committed to the Fighting Irish, that definitely helped Penn State a little bit, it seemed like. But Notre Dame is still in the weeds, and they're still working the North Carolina native, so that's something to keep an eye on. And then when it comes to Winston, I think he's taking an even longer-term approach to his recruitment. He is experienced to blow up. He's one of the elite recruits in the 2025 class at this point. He's been to Penn State a bunch. He's been to State College more than any other place in his recruitment. He's very comfortable with the staff, very comfortable with Anthony Poindexter. Always has that resource in his cousin, KJ Winston, to fall back on whenever he's looking to gain some more insight into the Nittany Lions. I think Ohio State's involvement with Winston moving forward is going to be interesting. You got the new safeties coach out in Columbus. Those two are trying to build a relationship. So where do things go there? I think that's what I'm going to be keeping an eye on. But with those guys, I think Penn State positions itself quite well. And then
Tyler,
again,
I know there's an offensive name you want to get to.
There is.
Before you work your way there, I just wanted to circle back to a few things on these defenders. First, with the defensive backs, and these are two names that if people are frequently listening to the Lions 24/7 podcast, you're frequently hearing them. And Jadon Blair out of Mount Tabor High School in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and then Kanoa Winston, the younger cousin of current starting Nittany Lions safety KJ Winston. He's out of Gonzaga in Washington, D.C. Those two guys are pretty coveted. You talked about Winston. I think he's top 5 safety, the number 2 safety overall right now in America. If they were to commit, and what you said is a relative term soon, but let's say before the official visit window opens, and both of those guys would have their pickings really of coast-to-coast options paid for them and their families to go check out other campuses. How do you think Penn State would be able to actually get that done? What would the case that they would have had to have made to convince a guy like Kanoa Winston to say, you know what, I'm good without going on the official visit circuit? Because we know one thing about James Franklin and commitments. He's not interested in accepting your commitment if you have an itinerary of travel plans ahead of you.
I think it just comes down to keeping things moving in the direction it's currently moving and, keep building that trust, keep building the relationships to the point where both prospects feel, they can play in state college and not just play for the Nittany Lions, but develop under the watch of Anthony Poindexter. He deserves a ton of credit for where Penn State is at with both of these guys. I mean, he's spearheading the efforts as the safeties coach. He's gotten a long look at both of these guys from an evaluation standpoint. He has zoned in on both as two of his priority safety targets in the class, and he's made that clear to them. And the good thing with Poindexter when it comes to these two recruitments is he's laid out, plans for utilization quite clearly, especially with Jadon Blair. He's a bigger safety. He's different than Winston. He's got that length and that longer, just overall bigger frame. So he could do some more things for you at safety. And pretty much every plan that Penn State has for Jadon Blair has been pitched to him, and he's been very receptive. And he's liked the fact that the staff has gone so in-depth and, figuring out ways to play to his strengths in the secondary. So I just think it's a matter of keeping things heading in the right direction. And I think you see during spring practices, a lot of these guys, they like to get to campus and see the coaches, specifically their position coaches, in action. What's it like when they're working with the guys who are already on their depth chart? That's a big factor in the process, I would say. I'd expect it to be a big factor for Blair and Winston, even though both have seen Poindexter work during games, but that's a little bit different. A practice setting, it's a little more intimate. You get to see more, and you kind of get a glimpse into what your future could be if you were to play for Poindexter. And then the blue-white game, if those guys make it back for Penn State spring game, that's always an event that works in Penn State's favor on the recruiting trail. So maybe some fireworks happen there. But again, when it comes to what it would take to get this across the finish line, I really think Penn State just has to keep doing what it's doing. It's going to come down to the individual timeline for these guys. When they're ready, they'll go.
Yeah, certainly complementary pieces, as you referenced from the size standpoint, with Blair being listed at 6'4", 190 pounds, more that Dakari Nelson type, and then Winston 5'10", 185 pounds, and he can do a lot for you in the defensive secondary. And then I just want to circle back to Burnett too, because we just discussed Penn State closing with a linebacker recruit here in the state and getting Alex Tatsch on board. DJ McClary is a guy you and I discussed last week on the show, 4-star. He's actually the top-rated member of this recruiting class out of Henry Snyder High School in Jersey City. He's been committed to the program since last September. So 2 linebackers on board. If you're talking about picking up a third, and that's where some commitment balls or crystal balls, I should say, for commitments are trending now in terms of Deshaun Burnett, another in-state player out of Amani Christian, who you just kind of gave us the rundown on, 4-star linebacker in his own right. But how does Penn State feel about adding a third linebacker at this stage of the 2025 timeline? What might that do for their continued interest in the position with the new position coach and defensive coordinator and Tom Allen? And then lastly, do you see Burnett as a guy who sticks at linebacker when he's 20 years old at the college level?
I think he could definitely grow into a defensive end role. We're kind of working to see more of what the plan is there for his development. He played on the edge a lot for Amani Christian as a junior. So, I mean, that is on tape, him lining up as more of an edge type player. So, that's something that he has familiarized himself with and has, gotten used to playing on the field. It's interesting because you're talking about 2 guys already on board and a potential third here soon, if that does come to fruition, and it's only February. So where does that take Penn State at linebacker moving forward? Profiles has a bigger group in this class, I would say. I think the 2025 class in general is going to be kind of around that 25, maybe even 25 plus mark like it was during 2024. But with linebackers specifically, 3-4 guys at position. I think 5 might be a lot. I guess it kind of depends what exactly the plan is for Burnett, where he's going to line up right off the bat. That'll play a big part in determining how many backers you decide to take. But it does create an interesting scenario here early in the cycle. 2 guys already on board, a third trending, and then you have a bunch of high priority, not higher priority necessarily, but guys who are high on the board, they're still out there for the taking. So decisions are going to have to be made. The pecking order is they're definitely going to have to do a deep dive into the pecking order. But, guys like Cam Smith, Anthony Saka, Ty Jackson from Florida who visited for a junior day, Elijah Melendez made it to campus for a junior day. There are a bunch of names still out there who are considering the Nittany Lions. So it's an interesting scenario, but it's one of those good problems to have. When you've got this many talented linebackers interested in taking their talents to Happy Valley, it's a good thing for the staff. They just got to make some calls.
And does anyone think that Penn State's going to suddenly become stocked down in terms of culture and perception at linebacker this year with the junior and Abdul Carter, a redshirt junior that we saw really make big strides in Kobe King, and then what we think Tony Rojas might be able to become as a sophomore? There's a lot of things trending in the right direction for them at linebacker on the field and on the recruiting trail as well. I was curious there because I was maybe wondering if we should be getting shades of Zariah Fisher, who came from Western PA. Got a first-year run at linebacker and ultimately said, all right, I'm ready to embrace this role, defensive end. And he has a chance to, in year 5 now, after picking up some momentum last year, to really finish his career as an impact player off the edge. And just going back, as you said, a top 5 for Burnett. And right now it certainly seems and sounds like Penn State is firmly in control here. But Penn State, Pitt, Rutgers, West Virginia, and Kentucky were that top 5 that he put out following his junior season. The other name that you wanted to get to here, and we'll go to the offensive end, it's another in-state player, and it's one of those guys who got his offer more recently during this whole junior day offer bonanza situation. The last 3 weeks we've seen as Penn State's kind of restructured its 2025 board. Take us to that spot.
Yeah, tight end's another position because Penn State is just involved with so many talented players at that position. And obviously, like any other position, there's a limited number of spots. But Andrew Olish from Central Valley has really moved up the board for Ty Howell. He picked up his offer for the Nittany Lions while he was on campus for that January 20th junior day. I mean, he's been very clear that that was a big offer for him, and Penn State is high on his list. His recruitment's really starting to take off. I believe he's touching 20 offers now. He's either close to 20 or he's at 20. And a lot of those offers have come from, really notable programs. You've got Miami involved, Duke, Ole Miss, Pitt, Rutgers, Michigan State. The list goes on and on. So I think that speaks to where his stock is heading. When it comes to, his timeline, he's another guy who hasn't committed to anything. He's very focused on learning more about the programs that are just jumping into his process now. But in-state guy, he's been around a bunch, has already professed, a pretty clear admiration for Ty Howell and the Penn State staff. He kind of has the feel of one of those tight ends who, he makes it back to campus for spring practice and things go well. He could maybe decide to wrap things up at that point. But again, next, it could be a month. It could be weeks. You just never know. But I think Penn State has done a pretty good job with Olish right now. And he's definitely high in the Nittany Lions. So he's a guy I'm keeping an eye on moving forward.
Well, I'm looking at this class, and I'm seeing the offers at tight end, and we've talked about how they're very high-aiming offers for Penn State, and a lot of those offers have been reciprocated. For instance, Hayden Bradley coming up from Buford, Georgia, a couple of weeks ago for a junior day. But there, some reporting from Tom Loy, who's been really contributing a lot more from a recruiting end at 24/7 Sports with some Penn State stuff for us of late. And he got reports just in the past few days about Lincoln Cure, the number 2 player at the tight end position in 2025 out of Kansas, having legitimate interest in Penn State. He's got a report about Nate Roberts out of Oklahoma, the number 6 tight end in this class, having legitimate interest in Penn State. And then you've got Olish here, an in-state player that you're saying maybe is trending towards him ending up in this class. They got one guy on board in the 2024 cycle. He was considered the best in the nation, and Luke Reynolds. Prior to that, they had signed 3 tight ends. Only 2 of them are still around, but are we getting the sense that this is a multi-tight end cycle?
Yeah, I think it could definitely be a multi-tight end cycle because, again, it comes back to, the desire to stockpile talent and quality depth, especially at this point in the cycle when Penn State has already established itself as at least a top contender with so many elite guys at the position. I mean, Lincoln Cure, there's no doubt about it that, he's probably most wanted at the position. And I think if it's interesting because Kansas State has done a really good job with Lincoln Kjær, and I do think the Wildcats are going to be tough to beat with him. It's an in-state option, and that staff has just done a really lights-out job recruiting him so far. But if he makes it to official visit season and, Penn State positions itself to get a visit, which I think it has done enough to definitely be in consideration for that, and he makes it to State College, he's already experienced a whiteout. So that's big. But if he makes it to State College for an official visit as an uncommitted prospect, who knows where things go? We've seen this happen so many times where guys who make it to Penn State, you think Penn State's a little bit further down the list, they get to State College and it kind of just hits them and it blows them away to at least some degree, and the list flips in Penn State's favor. Could that happen with Lincoln Kjær? I definitely think it's possible. Could it be happening with Nate Roberts if he gets back on campus again? I think it's possible. But, yeah, I definitely see it being another multi-tight end class because, again, if there's just certain guys on this board and among this group who you're just not going to say no to based on their talent and upside.
Two things to add on tight end. If folks out there weren't paying attention in the last week, Theo Johnson, stock up in the 2024 NFL draft, which is really a wide open spot at tight end beyond the top guy there, Brock Bowers out of Georgia. There's a lot of opportunity for movement at the tight end spot, a lot of opportunity to rise up that board. Theo Johnson doing himself some favors at the Senior Bowl in Mobile, Alabama. We've said for a long time that when he gets an opportunity to go put on compression shorts and a T-shirt and go run around a field and do testing numbers, he's going to kill it out there. So expect him to continue taking forward steps in his draft journey. And if he lands higher and higher and higher on boards, that's yet another thing that this staff can point to at the tight end position. And they got a lot of ammo right now on the recruiting trail. And the other point to make at tight end, Tyler, is we have to acknowledge that Brady O'Hara is somewhere in between tight end and offensive tackle in this recruiting class. I mean, maybe even defensive end. I don't know. You tell me. But this is a guy in Brady O'Hara who's 6'6", right around 240 pounds right now as a high school junior. He's been committed to Penn State since September at a North Catholic high school in Pittsburgh. Number 14 tight end right now at 24/7 Sports, a top 24/7 talent, a four-star kind of guy. But as we've discussed, jumbo athlete. So I just want to always make point when we talk about OT, when we talk about tight end in 2025 cycle, kind of got to just reference that he's somewhere in the midst. He's somewhere in the vicinity of that conversation. Right, Tyler?
Yeah, I do think at this point it's probably the most likely outcome as he winds up starting his career at tackle. But we talk about versatility in this class and guys who could do different things for you. Brady O'Hara is definitely one of them. I mean, that's kind of what he has spent his entire high school career doing. He has seen reps at tight end. I mean, we've watched him camp and work directly with Ty Howell as the tight end. He has played on the offensive line. As a junior, he was playing left tackle for North Catholic. And then he was lined up as a defensive end really from the start of his high school career and was an impact player on the defensive side of the ball. So right now, I do think offensive tackle is the projection there. But we'll see. Things could always change. I mean, he's an impressive athlete, that's for sure. And I think his best football is still ahead of him because he's going to grow into his frame and really come along physically. And I think, he's one of those dudes who he gets around Chuck Losey, he could definitely accomplish something special in the weight room because he's got that work ethic to him, that's for sure.
When these crystal ball picks go in and when things really start to trend towards these commitments, you'll find out first at Lions247.com with our team of experts, including Tyler Calvaruso. So make sure, again, 75% off just today here, Monday, February 5th, if you want to take a peek at what we've got cooking behind the scenes when it comes to recruiting coverage. From who may be next to commit to who really came away impressed by what Penn State put on display last Saturday. That's the story, or that's a topic of focus right now for us, Tyler. And again, 3 consecutive Saturdays in which Penn State welcomes a significant collection of recruits to campus for these junior days. They're very important because there's a lot of opportunities during this open window to go check out other events at other campuses. So to be able to get guys from not just within your own region, but as we've discussed, from Florida, from Texas, from North Carolina, up to your campus, it can help set the stage for those official visits, those game day visits later on in the process as you try to lock in this 2025 class. And then, as we said, 2026 recruits have been impacted by these junior days as well. But the quarterback spot is something that we previewed going into the final junior day. And we're on the other side of it, Matt Zollers. Let's, kind of check in on that because he's a top 10 quarterback here in the state of Pennsylvania. Don't see that often. And he's somebody who recently went south to check out some other Power 5 opportunities. And he just got a really interesting profile that's heading in a high-level Power 5 quarterback area. And I know Penn State, in a lot of ways, if they want this guy, they'd want to get it done sooner rather than later so this doesn't get really nationwide and he's not out coast to coast surveying his options, instead committing and helping build his in-state class here. So where are we with Matt Zollers coming out of his latest trip to campus?
I think it was important for him to get back to campus and, just meet again with Andy Kotelnicki. Kotelnicki dropped by his school in December, and he was on campus again during the winter to, meet Kotelnicki and get a better feel for his system. So I think it was imperative for Penn State to get him back on campus before the dead period and, just dive into those in-depth conversations about what Penn State's offense is going to look like moving forward and how Zollers would fit in that given his skill set. There's no doubt about it. He is the priority quarterback for Penn State right now when it comes to who is left on the board. And I think Penn State's done a pretty good job with him. He has checked out Georgia. He's checked out Florida. I think Georgia's involvement is probably the one to keep an eye on. I'm looking to learn more about where Florida's at there. But at the Georgia, offensive coordinator down there, Mike Bobo, did a really good job with Zollers while he was on campus late in January. And I said it when we talked about Zollers leading into this visit weekend. Georgia's quarterback situation in 2025 is kind of murky because they're not quite sure what Julian Lewis is going to do. The 5-star in-state guy, he's committed to USC right now. Is he going to stick with the Trojans? Is he going to wind up, deciding, hey, I want to stay in the Peach State and suit up for Georgia? I think that'll play a pretty big part in where Georgia decides to go at the position. So how that impacts Zollers remains to be seen. I mentioned Florida. I don't think Pittsburgh could be discounted for Zollers given his brother plays there, but Nittany Lions have a leg up on them. I know that. I think, he's still sorting through his options. I'd say Penn State is probably, a little bit ahead of the pack right now. But he's kind of at a point where he's going to make more visits in the spring. He's going to narrow his list down, and he's going to make those visits and make a decision based on how those visits play out. So he's been to Penn State a bunch. The relationships there are good. He's going to be back, and I think the Nittany Lions have done a really nice job with him.
Yeah, Zollers out of Springford High School has come a long way from the rising junior that we saw last June, picking up an offer from Ricky Ronnie in Old Dominion after the 7-on-7 tournament. A very different picture has been painted for his outlook on the recruiting trail, and we'll see where Penn State stands continuing forward. Another name that we previewed going into the weekend, and we'll look at now coming out of it, is from one of the premier programs in all of America, St. Joe's Prep in Philadelphia. Guy who started his high school career, really burst onto the Power 5 scene as a recruit at Salem High School in South Jersey. Cam Smith, really impressive player here at the linebacker position, top 200 overall talent, top 20 linebacker in 24/7 sports assessment, and someone who's been on Penn State's radar for a long time, spanning a couple different defensive coordinators now.
Yeah, and he told me after his visit that Penn State's probably his top choice at this point in his process. And that's a process that's going to go on a little while longer. He's been pretty consistent with me from the start timeline-wise. He's probably going to go through that June official visit process and then make a decision there in the summer. How does that timeline work with what Penn State has going on at linebacker right now? I think we're going to have to wait and see, if and how that will impact the equation for Cam Smith. But when it comes to this visit, the priority for him was getting back to town and meeting new DC Tom Allen for the first time because, he was really tight with Manny Diaz and Gabe Infante, and he had a pretty good feeling for how he would fit in their scheme. He'd been hearing about Allen since Penn State hired him and, hearing, oh, you're going to be a good fit in this scheme. It fits what you do well. But he wanted to get to campus and find that out for himself. And when he did to get to campus, he learned it's actually a defense that he's already pretty comfortable playing in, given what St. Joe's Prep runs. So it seems like those two, that relationship is probably heading in a good direction now that they've got the chance to meet in person. And Smith is really, really hot on Penn State at this point in this process. When I talked to him in the fall, it was kind of clear that Penn State was the leader. I think this visit reaffirmed that. But again, moving forward, that linebacker board is going to play itself out, and you can't discount the other programs involved with Smith as well. Rutgers has gotten him back on campus multiple times. I think you got to monitor Duke now as well. I mentioned how much he liked Diaz and Gabe Infante. Now those two are in Durham, and he made it down there for a junior day visit before he traveled to Penn State on Saturday. So there's a lot going on in that recruitment, but I think Penn State's ahead of the pack right now.
Big fan of Cam Smith. I think his measurements are probably holding him back from reaching a different threshold in terms of some of the Power 5 offers out there, just talking about nationally. But when you look, and I'm just talking about height and weight in terms of measurements, not necessarily, but he is an explosive athlete. And you look at what he did at Salem as an underclassman on both sides of the ball, best player on the field kind of thing. And I wondered when I saw he was making that move to St. Joe's Prep, okay, it's going to be a different kind of playing field, right? And to still stand out as an explosive presence when you're not just playing on that team, but the schedule that they usually line up against for St. Joe's Prep, and it's a national schedule. So now that that's on film and he's still checking those boxes, really exciting prospect. And I think the offer sheet doesn't necessarily reflect who he is as a prospect, but I think the ranking's right there, 152 overall nationally, the number 4 player in the state of Pennsylvania. Although, as we said, the South Jersey roots. Let's go down to Florida, going through some of these names. Actually, before we get there, we'll take a pit stop in North Carolina, if that works for you, because that's where we'll find Michael Gibbs in Wilmington, North Carolina, to be exact, an offensive lineman who made the trip up last weekend, another guy that we were looking forward to coming up to Happy Valley and the kind of impact. Phil Troutwine went down to him in January. He picked up an offer a couple weeks before Phil Troutwine came down to his school, and now here he was visiting Phil Troutwine's neck of the woods. So how do we come out of this whole thing where, as we talked about last episode, in 1 month, Penn State and Michael Gibbs out of Wilmington, North Carolina, packed a lot into a recruitment, and I'm curious where they end up here in early February.
Yeah, Penn State definitely came out of this one shining. We'll have more on Gibbs online 24/7 soon. He had a lot of positive feedback for me from this visit, specifically when it came to Phil Troutwine. Just another example of Troutwine getting around Gibbs and his family and really just both parties hitting it off and feeling comfortable with each other. Gibbs really liked the energy of head coach James Franklin throughout the day. Just really liked everything that Penn State had to offer. So I'd anticipate the Nittany Lions are a pretty big-time player with Gibbs moving forward. He looking like a tackle prospect on that board for Penn State. And, we mentioned Alicine and O'Hara being on board already. O'Hara obviously still need to figure out exactly what's going to happen with him. But with Alicine on board, there is still room to add at tackle. And Gibbs is a guy that could also kick inside and play on the interior. So there's versatility to his game. He could play kind of 1 through 5. And, the next guy we talk about, he's another one that could play 1 through 5. That seems like a theme with a lot of the guys Penn State is involved with right now. But Gibbs, that visit went really well. And I think Penn State is really standing out to him right now.
Well, I'm almost like shocked when I look at a tackle profile now that Penn State's involved in like this, and the guy's not 6'7", 6'8". Gibbs 6'4", 265-ish range right now, and it's like, okay, yeah, that's a normal human being. Not a normal human being. That's kind of a normal size for a junior. But Phil Troutwine's just been adding these mammoths, and not all of them are 300 pounds plus yet. You've got a 6'8", 250-pound freshman on campus right now in Egan Boyer. But I was like, wait, are we sure that Michael Gibbs isn't 6'6" plus? Because that seems to be exclusive right now. All right, moving forward, you mentioned another offensive lineman, 6'5", 270. A junior out of Sumner High School in Riverview, Florida, Zaire Addison. He's a 4-star prospect. He's the number 26 offensive tackle in the country for the 2025 cycle. And like Gibbs, he got a firsthand account of what it's like in State College this past weekend. And what's the report on how that went for Addison?
Yeah, Penn State, first trip to Penn State for Addison, and it moved into his top 5 after this visit. He's already planning on returning to campus in the spring. I think an official visit is definitely in the cards at this point. Zaire Addison's a guy who's been moving up the Phil Troutwine's board pretty much for a while now. They've been down in Florida to see him at school. They get him on campus over the weekend, and, he's got his wingspan is ridiculous. Phil Troutwine even told them what Zaire Addison has from a physical standpoint. It's rare for any athlete at any position. So I think it's pretty clear, he's stock up on Penn State's board, and he could play tackle, he could play guard, he could play center, he could really do anything asked of him. And that's something that Penn State likes about him. And Addison likes the fact that Penn State sees that. He likes that Penn State isn't pigeonholing him into a position and, this is going to be your role and this is where we like you. It's no, you could do a lot of different things for us on the O-line. We like that. And Addison has been receptive. I still look at Miami as a big-time player with Addison. I think the Canes will be tough to beat, but Penn State definitely helped itself with the Florida native over the weekend, and he'll be back on campus. So the potential for that recruitment to continue taking off from the Nittany Lions perspective is very much there.
Stay in the Sunshine State, another player that we referenced a bit last week at the receiver spot. And as we said, it was a really intriguing weekend at receiver with the volume of offered talent in the 2025 cycle in State College for this junior day. Samari Reed is one of those who traveled as long as anybody just about to be in attendance at this event at a Monarch High School in Pompano Beach, Florida. A big, longer receiver as a junior right now, not yet ranked by 24/7 Sports, but carries about 20 FBS offers, and Penn State got a chance to impress. Did they do that? And what was the overall feel of the experience from what you've gathered?
Definitely impressed. Moving to the top 3 for Reed. The first time he visited Penn State was during the summer when he traveled from Florida to State College to participate in that 7-on-7 tournament with his Monarch team. Most of his focus that day was helping Monarch win a championship. So he didn't get the chance to do a whole lot more than, ball out on the field in front of the staff. But he gets back to campus for this visit. He wanted to see Penn State more in depth because when he was in town, he was liking what he was seeing, just looking around, getting a feel for the program, the coaches, being around them all day. He was liking Penn State, so he wanted to make it back for this visit. Javon Siders played a pretty big role in this recruitment, but it was important for Reed to get back and meet with Marcus Hagan and meet with Andy Kotelnicki and learn more about the direction of the offense and the utilization of receivers in Kotelnicki's scheme and how Hagan's works with his guys. I think Penn State hit on both of those areas. It seemed like Reed was impressed with what Kotelnicki and Hagan's had to say. He's going to be back in the spring. He wants to check out 3 other schools, West Virginia, Missouri. He wants to, stay in that region and get some visits in there. But Penn State, it's definitely on getting back to campus is definitely on the to-do list for Reed. And given, just how jumbled up that wide receiver board is with so many offers out there, anytime a guy we know the staff likes, goes on record and says his interest is heightened, it's definitely noteworthy and something to keep an eye on in the coming weeks and months.
A lot more reaction to these visits at Lions247.com as Penn State moving up the board for plenty of recruits, as Tyler Calvaruso has mentioned throughout this episode. There are more reactions coming. I know each of us, and I'm sure many members of the 24/7 Sports Network, are still working their way through conversations and transcript and what have you to put together some stories on feedback from Penn State's third consecutive Junior Day event, and that'll close the book for a bit. Tyler, what do you think Penn State was able to accomplish during these last 3 weeks now that we can kind of put a punctuation mark at the end of it? The dead period settles in. Penn State coaches are going to really be focused in on these winter workouts and on-campus development here for the next little while. But in the last 3 weeks, a lot of plane rides, a lot of long-distance car trips, a lot of opportunities to get face-to-face with recruits here on campus and then at high schools across the country for the Nittany Lions. Picked up a couple commitments along the way. Can you kind of put a bow on this and summarize what this program accomplished during that span?
Lock down a couple guys, like you said. That's always, sometimes a lot of these Junior Day visits, they don't result in commitments right away, but they result in commitments down the road because you put your relationship in such a good place where, Penn State could be a pretty big player moving forward. But it got 2 guys locked in coming out of these visits, and Owen Alcini and Alex Tatsch, so that's a big deal. And I think really with all the priority 2025 guys who made it to campus, I think Penn State kind of helped itself and moved up a lot of lists throughout this Junior Day season. So the staff did a lot of good work making families, especially, guys who traveled from out of state. All those recruits felt really at home or really comfortable around the staff. And then 2026 too, it's still really early, but they hosted a lot of priority targets specifically in the state of Pennsylvania, and Penn State's continued to do good work with the underclassmen who are high on its board. So I think the staff accomplished pretty much everything they wanted to accomplish. Got a couple commitments, kept the ball rolling in the right direction with some priority guys in 25, and you're laying the groundwork for success in 2026 as well. So I think head coach James Franklin and his staff, I think they will attribute that as an successful Junior Day slate.
Tyler, as we were talking, I saw that Tom Loy had a report out. It's over at our site as well, 24/7 Sports, just breaking down what's ahead for Jadon Blair that we just spent some time discussing, the 4-star safety. He's got his 4 official visits locked in for late May through late June, going to South Carolina May 31st, Notre Dame June 7th, Michigan June 14th, and then Penn State June 21st. Just off the cuff, what do you think about the Nittany Lions batting leadoff in that planned order of operations?
I think when you look at this list, Michigan, the timing is interesting for Penn State. Getting that.
I said leadoff. I'm sorry, batting cleanup. Because South Carolina is batting leadoff here.
Yeah, I think that's actually interesting because he visited South Carolina before he made it to Penn State, and the Gamecocks made a good impression on him. I mentioned Notre Dame on June 7th. I think Notre Dame is a sleeper there. Michigan on the 14th. That's a place that he has told me he's wanted to visit and learn more about, so that's intriguing. But I think Penn State being last, I think it's a good spot. But I'm kind of like 50-50 on it because if you look at the landscape of official visits last year, there were a lot of guys who were popping off that first visit, whether it be to Penn State or just guys who were making it to other campuses and committing really coming out of their first visit. So it's kind of like hit or miss, Does South Carolina make such a strong impression where Blair feels at home, or does he want to continue to go through his process and then Penn State gets the last crack at him? Traditionally, I would say having the last visit, it's a big deal because it's your, you get the last crack, you get that. That's the pitch that you send him home with. That's the last pitch he gets to hear. That's what's resonating with him as he sits down with his family to make a decision. But then at the same time, you kind of run the risk of him deciding to go elsewhere and never making it to campus. But maybe we're reading too much into the specific structure because every recruit is an individual, right? And guys aren't going to make decisions based on previous trends. You got to approach it on a case-by-case basis. But I do like Penn State getting that last visit because I do think we've seen it where Penn State, when they do get a last visit, they seem to do pretty well and they have a pretty, solid hit rate there with guys who decide to visit State College less in their official visit process. So it's interesting. I do like Penn State for Blair in general. I've said it countless times. I do think the Nittany Lions are the team to beat there at this juncture.
He was just on campus too. So It's not like if this is a guy who hadn't been on campus since last summer and you've got to wait till the fourth visit in the official visit itinerary, then you're this isn't really that good. This is a different thing. The familiarity is there. The connection is there. And I think, you just try to weather the storm, let everyone make their pitch, and then, kind of just say, here's what we've been saying since the beginning. Let's go over this again and make sure you feel home. And then that's what you hope you're able to do as a staff with Penn State in this case. And in a lot of the cases when, as we said, batting cleanup versus batting leadoff. So Tyler, really appreciate the coverage. As I said, winter workouts are underway. We have a bunch coming your way from those, including a rundown today on Monday of who was named the competitors of the day in each position room. And we've also working our way towards spring ball. We're just about 5 weeks out of this team getting back on the football field, having a chance to cover all that in action. But Cal Varuso, really appreciate it. You've been on just about every episode with us during this 3 week span. We're going to do our best, barring any breaking news, because I will pull you back on board for some breaking news this week, but give you a little bit of time away from the podcast, catch your voice back, and maybe focus on some other things for a while. But really been great having you on with us and keeping our finger on the pulse of Penn State recruiting with you along the way.
No, I appreciate you having me on, man. It's always a good time.
All right. We'll catch up with Tyler again soon right here on the podcast. Our plan for next episode this week will have Daniel Gallen back on, and we'll break down this Penn State defense from a depth chart perspective. We did that last Tuesday, breaking down the offensive depth chart and how that's coming together in early 2024. We'll do that for defense next time around. Also working on the possibility of coordinating another guest on the show. So we'll keep you posted on that. And if any breaking news pops on the recruiting trail, as I said, I won't hesitate to end Tyler's hiatus immediately and get him back on for our next episode of the podcast. For now, just one final reminder, 75% off a full VIP annual subscription at lions247.com. Right now, Monday, February 5th, and only Monday, February 5th, 75% off. Head over to lions247.com for those details to make the plunge if you're ready. For now, stepping aside on behalf of Tyler Calvaruso and our entire 24/7 sports community, I am Tyler Donahue. This has been the Lions 24/7 podcast.